What is consciousness? Is it a real phenomenon, or is it just a figment of our imagination? Throughout human history, philosophers, scientists, and religious leaders have grappled with this question. Some have claimed that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe, while others have dismissed it as an illusion. In this documentary, we will explore the origins of consciousness, examine what different religions say about it, and consider the views of spiritual teacher Sadhguru and scientists. What is consciousness? The origins of the concept of consciousness can be traced back to ancient Greece, where philosophers like Plato and Aristotle debated the nature of the mind and soul. Over time, different cultures and religions have developed their own theories about consciousness. In Hinduism, for example, consciousness is seen as a universal, all-encompassing energy that connects all things. In Christianity, consciousness is often associated with the soul and the afterlife. How do we define consciousness? Is it simply the awareness of our surroundings, or is it something deeper and more mysterious? Spiritual teacher Sadhguru has spoken extensively about consciousness, describing it as the fundamental nature of existence itself.
Intelligence beyond memory, which we call as Turiya or Chitta, this is consciousness. Now, every one of us is conscious. The question is only of degree. Even a rock is conscious, a dog is conscious, a pig is conscious. The question is only of degree, how conscious. Even among us, how conscious is different from person to person. So, this degree of consciousness determines everything. Now, if we have to give an analogy, so when you blow a soap bubble, the soap part of it, which is very little, just a tiny drop, a large part of it is air that it captures. So how big a bubble? When you were children, who can blow the biggest bubble was a big deal. And it's a certain amount of technique.
Yeah,
how you do it. Somebody blew this big bubble, somebody got only this much. So how big a bubble? This bubble is like this, the kind of soap and how it gathers is your memory. It forms it gives it a form. But when the memory bursts, there is no such thing as your air and my air. There is no such thing as your consciousness and my consciousness. There is something called as your body and my body. There is something called as your memory and my memory. There is something called as your intellect and my intellect. But there is nothing called as your consciousness and my consciousness. How much of it did you capture? How big is your bubble will determine the scale of your life. The scale and possibilities of your life are determined by how big a bubble did you blow.
According to Sadhguru, consciousness is a limitless state of being that goes beyond the limitations of the mind and body. Science explains things a little different. Here are two images of a house. There's one obvious difference, but to this patient, Kelly, they looked completely identical. Kelly had suffered a stroke that damaged the right side of her brain, leaving her unaware of everything on her left side. But though she could discern no difference between the houses, when researchers asked her which she would prefer to live in, she chose the house that wasn't burning, not once, but again and again. Kelly's brain was still processing information from her whole field of vision. She could see both images and tell the difference between them, she just didn't know it. If someone threw a ball at her left side, she might duck. But she wouldn't have any awareness of the ball or any idea why she ducked. Kelly's condition, known as hemispecial neglect, reveals an important distinction between the brain's processing of information and our experience of that processing. That experience is what we call consciousness. We are conscious of both the external world and our internal selves. We are aware of an image in much the same way we are aware of ourselves looking at an image, or our inner thoughts and emotions. But where does consciousness come from? Scientists, theologians, and philosophers have been trying to get to the bottom of this question for centuries, without reaching any consensus. One recent theory is that consciousness is the brain's imperfect picture of its own activity. To understand this theory, it helps to have a clear idea of one important way the brain processes information from our senses. Based on sensory input, it builds models, which are continuously updating, simplified descriptions of objects and events in the world. Everything we know is based on these models. They never capture every detail of the things they describe, just enough for the brain to determine appropriate responses. For instance, one model built deep into the visual system codes white light as brightness without color. In reality, white light includes wavelengths that correspond to all the different colors we can see. Our perception of white light is wrong and oversimplified, but good enough for us to function. Likewise, the brain's model of the physical body keeps track of the configuration of our limbs, but not of individual cells or even muscles, because that level of information isn't needed to plan movement. If it didn't have the model keeping track of the body's size, shape, and how it is moving at any moment, we would quickly injure ourselves. The brain also needs models of itself. For example, the brain has the ability to pay attention to specific objects and events. It also controls that focus, shifting it from one thing to another, internal and external, according to our needs. Without the ability to direct our focus, we wouldn't be able to assess threats, finish a meal, or function at all. To control focus effectively, the brain has to construct a model of its own attention. With 86 billion neurons constantly interacting with each other, there's no way the brain's model of its own information processing can be perfectly self-descriptive. But like the model of the body, or our conception of white light, it doesn't have to be. Our certainty that we have a metaphysical, subjective experience may come from one of the brain's models, a cut-corner description of what it means to process information in a focused and deep manner. Scientists have already begun trying to figure out how the brain creates that self-model. MRI studies are a promising avenue for pinpointing the networks involved. These studies compare patterns of neural activation when someone is and isn't conscious of a sensory stimulus, like an image. The results show that the areas needed for visual processing are activated whether or not the participant is aware of the image, but a whole additional network lights up only when they are conscious of seeing the image. Patients with hemispecial neglect, like Kelly, typically have damage to one particular part of this network. More extensive damage to the network can sometimes lead to a vegetative state, with no sign of consciousness. Evidence like this brings us closer to understanding how consciousness is built into the brain. But there's still much more to learn. For instance, the way neurons in the networks related to consciousness compute specific pieces of information is outside the scope of our current technology. As we approach questions of consciousness with science, we'll open new lines of inquiry into human identity.
Intelligence beyond memory, which we call as Turiya.
Now let's have a closer look into what Sadhguru was describing. What are the four states of consciousness? Mandukya Upanishad is the source of the Hindu revelations about the four states of consciousness and defines these states as Jagrat, waking state. This is the state that we experience while awake, and it is the most familiar to us. In this state, we are aware of our surroundings, our thoughts, and our physical sensations. It is characterized by the duality of subject and object, where we perceive ourselves as separate from the world around us. Svapna. Dream state. This is the state that we experience during sleep when we dream. In this state, we are not aware of our physical surroundings, but we are still conscious and experiencing mental images and sensations. The dream state is also characterized by the duality of subject and object, where we perceive ourselves as separate from the dream world. Susupti. Dreamless deep sleep state. This is the state that we experience during deep sleep when we are not dreaming. In this state, there is no subject or object, and we are not aware of anything. It is characterized by a sense of void or nothingness. Turiya. Turiya or pure consciousness. This is the state of absolute reality, also known as pure consciousness. In this state, one becomes aware of their mind and body and realizes that they are witnessing it rather than being it. It is characterized by the absence of duality, where there is no subject or object, and one experiences non-dual consciousness. This state can be reached through meditation and is characterized by qualities such as equanimity, detachment, adaptability, immense bliss, and a sense of oneness with everything.
Are you discounting whether the brain controls consciousness?
No, I think what we would say is the brain is a reducing valve or filter that allows primordial consciousness in. That is, the brain is not the creator of it. You cannot explain all of the details of human experience, especially all the evidence for non-local consciousness, the evidence for things like reincarnation, past life memories in children, indicative of reincarnation, things like that, if you think the brain is the producer of consciousness.
So what is the producer?
Well, consciousness is what exists and generates the entire universe. It's the fundamental ground state.
So this is my consciousness now, right?
It's all consciousness. It's all generated within consciousness. I mean, the thing to remember is we're under we discuss in the book what we call the supreme illusion, and that is that the brain and mind are very good at convincing us that all this stuff around us is out there. But what you're actually experiencing is a model deep within mind that is supposed to represent something that is out there. But I think that's where it's important to point out the mystery of quantum physics, because the experiments in quantum physics keep showing us in no uncertain terms that consciousness is fundamental, that the conscious observer and our free will has everything to do with determining outcomes. It's not determined by mechanistic chemical reactions and the laws of physics and chemistry applied to the brain.
Doesn't it almost destroy everything you learned?
Absolutely not. In fact, it opens the door to a far broader understanding, because what we're saying is the brain is simply a reducing valve that allows certain conscious states to exist. And this is where, from the quantum physical standpoint, it's really getting at what's known as the observer. That is the deep mystery, is the awareness of existence. And what I would submit is that we're conscious in spite of our brain. And so, in fact, the big surprise and kind of the practical lesson for human beings is that when your physical brain and body die, your conscious awareness actually expands tremendously.
As we ponder the nature of consciousness, we are reminded that the quest for knowledge and understanding is a never-ending journey. Whether we look to science, religion, or spiritual teachings, we must remain open to new ideas and be willing to challenge our own beliefs. For it is only through curiosity and skepticism that we can hope to unlock the secrets of the universe. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Help us on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers, as it will help us to be able to make consistent and great content like this.